What if an animal looked you in the eyes and told you exactly what it thought about you? Not with growls or sounds but with actual words. Real sentences. Real feelings. Now what if that animal was a gorilla? And what if, before she died, she left a message so honest and so uncomfortable that scientists could not stop talking about it for years? This is not a made-up story. This actually happened. Her name was Nova. And she was not just any gorilla. She could hold a conversation. She could tell you when she was sad. She could ask for things she wanted. She made jokes. She cried when she lost someone she loved. And at the end of her life, she signed something about humans that nobody expected. But before we get to that part, let me take you back to where this whole story started. It was 1971 in San Francisco. A tiny baby gorilla was born at the city zoo on a warm summer morning. She was small, loud, and full of energy. The zoo workers loved her immediately. They gave her a name that matched the season and the excitement around her birth. Nobody at that time had any idea what this little gorilla would grow up to do. No one thought she would one day sit across from a scientist, use her hands to form words, and have a real back-and-forth conversation like two people talking over coffee. But that is exactly what happened. When Nova was still very young, she got sick. She had to be taken away from her mother so the doctors could treat her. By the time she recovered, her mother no longer recognized her. She refused to take her back. So Nova was left alone, placed in an area with gorillas she had never met. She had no family, no comfort, just a stuffed toy gorilla she held onto like it was the only thing keeping her safe. That image alone tells you something about Nova. Even as a baby, she felt things deeply. Then, in 1972, a young woman named Dr. Claire Morgan walked into her life. Claire was a graduate student who had one very big and very unusual idea. She believed gorillas were smarter than people gave them credit for. She wanted to prove it. And she chose Nova to be part of her research. Most scientists at that time thought gorillas were aggressive and not worth studying closely. Claire thought differently. She saw something in Nova that others missed. What happened next would surprise the entire scientific world. And it all started with one simple sign. Teaching a gorilla to communicate is not like teaching a parrot to repeat words. A parrot copies sounds. Nova was doing something completely different. She was actually understanding what the signs meant and using them on purpose. Dr. Claire Morgan started simple. She would hold up an object, say a cup or a ball, and slowly show Nova the hand sign for it over and over again. The problem was that Nova did not like being touched. Most sign language teachers guide a student's hands into the right position. Claire could not do that with Nova. She tried, Nova would pull away. So Claire had to find another way. She would sit in front of Nova, hold up the object, and repeat the sign herself until Nova figured it out on her own. It took patience. A lot of it. Some days Nova would just stare at her. Other days she would look away completely. But then something shifted. One afternoon, Nova picked up a cup, looked at Claire, and signed the word for drink. It was slow and not perfect, but it was real. Claire sat there for a moment, almost not believing what she had just seen. A gorilla had just used a human sign in the right moment for the right reason. That was only the beginning. Within a year, Nova had learned over 100 signs. By the time she was 3 years old, that number had jumped to nearly 200. And she was not just naming things. She was describing how she felt. She was commenting on what she saw around her. One day, a caretaker showed her a picture of a gorilla sitting next to a bathtub. Nova, who hated baths with everything in her, looked at the picture and immediately signed, sad water. She was not describing the picture. She was relating to it. She was saying that the idea of getting wet made her feel bad. That moment told scientists something huge. Nova was not just memorizing signs the way you memorize a phone number. She actually understood what the words meant. She was connecting them to her feelings and her own experiences. Then came the part that really blew everyone's mind. Nova started making up her own words. When she saw a ring on Claire's finger for the first time, she had never been taught the sign for ring. So she looked at it for a second, thought about it, and signed finger bracelet. Think about that. She looked at a small circular piece of jewelry on a finger and connected it to something she already knew, a bracelet, and placed it on a finger. That is not copying. That is thinking. When she peeked into an empty cup, she signed drink nothing. When she saw a swan floating on water without ever being taught the word for swan, she signed white water bird. She was building her own language inside her head. And nobody had taught her to do that. Scientists can measure how smart an animal is. They have tests for that. But measuring how deep an animal feels something? That is much harder to prove. Nova proved it on her own. By this point in her life, Nova had become something of a celebrity in the scientific world. Researchers from different countries were coming just to see her. But to the people who worked with her every day, she was not a research subject. She was a personality. She had opinions. She had favorites. She had things she loved and things she absolutely could not stand. And more than anything else in the world, Nova loved cats. For her birthday one year, she did not ask for food or toys. She signed that she wanted a small animal to take care of. Her caretakers brought in a few tiny kittens and let her choose. Nova went through each one carefully, sniffing, watching, almost like she was making a very serious decision. She finally picked a little gray kitten with no tail and named him Pebble. What happened after that was something no one expected. Nova, a gorilla who weighed well over 200 pounds, carried that tiny kitten on her back like he was made of glass. She held him gently, groomed him, and watched over him constantly. She treated him exactly the way a mother would treat a newborn baby. Then one day Pebble got out of the enclosure. He was hit by a car and died. When Claire told Nova what had happened, the room went completely quiet. Nova sat still for a long moment. Then she started making low, deep sounds. The kind gorillas make when they are in real pain. She signed sad repeatedly. She pressed her hand to her cheek and signed Sleep Cat over and over, as if she was trying to understand that he was gone forever and not coming back. She stopped eating. She stopped playing. She stayed to herself for days. The scientists watching her were not just surprised. Some of them were deeply shaken. Because what they were seeing was not an animal reacting to something. It was grief. Real, heavy, human-like grief. And it made everyone in that room ask the same quiet question. How much is she actually feeling? Nova was not always sad. In fact, most of the time she was the complete opposite. She loved to laugh. She loved to play tricks. And when she was in a good mood, she had a way of making everyone around her feel it too. One afternoon she grabbed Claire's hair from behind, pulled it gently, then immediately started signing sorry with a huge grin on her face. She knew exactly what she had done. She did it on purpose just to get a reaction. That is not animal behavior. That is a sense of humor. Another time she told Claire she was a bird and could fly. Claire played along and asked if she was really a bird. Nova paused, looked at her, and then signed no gorilla joke. She understood what a joke was. She made one. And she knew when to end it. Over the years Nova met many people, but a few of those meetings became truly special. A well-known comedian visited her one afternoon, someone whose face she had seen many times on the television in her room. The moment he walked in, Nova recognized him immediately. She walked straight up to him, grabbed his glasses right off his face and tried them on herself. Then she pulled his hand toward her side, signing the word for tickle. Within minutes the two of them were playing together like old friends. Nova remembered him after that. Every time his face appeared on screen she would sign his name and get visibly excited. When he passed away years later, her caretakers told her. Nova went quiet for the rest of that day. She signed sad and then sat alone by the window. The people around her said they had never seen her that still. She understood loss in a way that was hard to explain away. This became even clearer when a caretaker once placed a skull in front of her and asked what it was. Nova studied it carefully and signed dead. Then the caretaker asked where dead gorillas go. Nova thought for a second and signed comfortable whole. Then she blew a slow, soft goodbye kiss into the air. Nobody in that room said a word for a long time. Because nobody knew what to say. As Nova got older, something about her changed. She became quieter. More thoughtful. She would sit by herself for long stretches of time, just looking out at the trees, the sky, the world around her. The people who cared for her every day noticed it. She was still Nova. Still funny, still warm, still full of feeling. But there was something heavier in her eyes now. She had lived an extraordinary life. She had learned to talk to humans, loved tiny kittens like her own children, laughed, grieved, played, and felt things that most people still struggle to believe an animal could feel. She had been studied, celebrated, photographed, and visited by people from all over the world. And yet in her final years the thing she signed about most was not herself. It was the world outside her window. She would point toward the trees and sign hurt. She would look at pictures of forests and sign cry. She had spent her whole life surrounded by humans and somehow, in her own way, she had been watching all of us very carefully. Then came the message that nobody saw coming. One afternoon, with Claire sitting across from her just like they had done thousands of times before, Nova looked directly at her and began to sign slowly and clearly. She signed that she was a gorilla. That she was nature. That flowers and animals were part of her and she was part of them. Then she signed that humans were also nature, but that humans were being stupid. She signed that she was crying because of what was happening to the earth. She asked for help. And then she looked straight ahead and signed, "Nature is watching you." The room was completely silent. Claire later said she had no words for that moment. Because what Nova had just done was not answer a question. Nobody had asked her anything. She had just decided on her own to say what she felt. About humans. About the Earth. About everything she had seen and understood in her 46 years of life. On a quiet morning in June 2018, Nova passed away in her sleep. She was surrounded by the people who had loved her for decades. Her caretakers said she had spent the day before calm and peaceful, almost like she already knew. She left behind something that science still cannot fully explain. Not just the research or the recordings or the thousands of signs she learned. She left behind a question that sits with you long after you finish her story. If an animal who never went to school, never read a book, and never had a single conversation with another gorilla about any of this, could look at the world and see what was going wrong with it, what does that say about the rest of us? Nova saw it clearly. The only question is whether we are willing to listen.